After 18 months of talks and nearly 2 decades of war, the US and the Afghan Taliban have just signed a long-awaited deal aimed at paving the way to peace and the departure of foreign troops. Now, the leader of the Taliban delegation, Mullah Abdul Ghani Barda, and the US envoy for peace in Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, signed the agreement in Doha, watched by dignitaries including the US Secretary of State and foreign ministers from Qatar and Pakistan. Under the deal, the US and NATO say that they'll pull out all foreign troops within 14 months if the Taliban honours its part of the agreement, and that includes a 135-day initial period to reduce violence. Both sides have also agreed to exchange as many as up to 6,000 prisoners. Now, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the agreement is a crucial first step towards peace.
This agreement will mean nothing, and today's good feelings will not last if we don't take concrete actions on commitments and promises that have been made. When it comes down to it, the future of Afghanistan is for Afghans to determine. The U.S.-Taliban deal creates the conditions for Afghans to do just that. Here's our take. Here's our take on what steps by the Taliban will make this agreement a success. First, keep your promises to cut ties with Al-Qaeda and other terrorists. Keep up the fight to defeat ISIS.
Well, absolutely. As you heard the U.S. Secretary of State saying that the United States will not fight in perpetuity in the graveyard of empires. That is how the United States saw its presence in Afghanistan. That is something that the Afghan Taliban wanted to end. And it looks like that is what has been achieved in Doha after months of wrangling and negotiations. This is a process which started 10 years ago when Mullah Muhammad Omar was still in charge of the Taliban. But now, finally, after the office of the Taliban was opened in 2013 rather, in Doha, they have inked this agreement. According to this agreement, all sides will have to abide by their respective terms. The United States will gradually withdraw its troops. You see the 7-day reduction in violence expanded to 135 days, and then a gradual withdrawal within 14 months of all American and foreign troops. They will be initially leaving 5 bases as well. The Afghan government is going to push the United Nations to remove members of the Taliban from the sanctions list. The Afghan Taliban is going to not just reduce violence, but it is going to continue its fight against ISIL and make sure that its soil is never used again by Al-Qaeda. So there's a lot at stake, but again, a first step towards lasting peace in Afghanistan has been taken.
The United States and the Taliban have endured decades of hostility and mistrust. Previous talks have faltered. This effort only became real for the United States when the Taliban signaled interest in pursuing peace and ending their relationship with Al-Qaeda and other foreign terrorist groups. They also recognized that military victory was impossible.
This step was very important because this step to be taken, inshallah, properly, opening a door to intra-Afghan negotiation. And with the people of Afghanistan, they are waiting eagerly to the next step. I think this was hard. The positive will be taken. Then it's a step, and we'll go off, inshallah, without problem. The Taliban giving insurance to the people of Afghanistan that the next Afghanistan will be stable, and Afghanistan will be for all Afghan, including women, men, minority, majority, all of them. And we will work together to make Afghanistan stable Afghanistan, peaceful Afghanistan, and to make more progress. The Taliban, which I understand, they are not interested in continuing fighting in Afghanistan. That the fighting in Afghanistan was imposed on Taliban. But anyway, today is very important.
John Brennan is back with me. He's a former director of the CIA and an MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. Director, let's just start with the idea that the Biden administration says it had at least one hand, if not two, tied behind its back because the Trump administration committed to America leaving Afghanistan. Do you buy into that argument?
Well, I do, because the Trump administration made this agreement with the Taliban that committed the United States to departing by May, but also the Trump administration had drawn down American troops to 2,500, the lowest that have been there in many, many, many years. And so therefore, the Biden administration was faced with a choice, whether or not to withdraw those U.S. forces or to change course, which would have involved starting up the war again with the Taliban. And it was pointed out there, the Taliban was in the strongest position they had been in years. So yes, the Biden administration was given a very poor hand, but it's almost inevitable that an operation of this size and magnitude was going to have real challenges and problems. And so when they got to withdraw in August, I think a lot of that just came to the fore. But let's face it, the situation in Afghanistan, it deteriorated far more rapidly than anybody anticipated. And the Afghan government then started to collapse, including the departure of President Abdul Ghani. And once that happened, there was this rolling sort of momentum of the people who wanted to depart. And so the United States was involved in a full retrograde, which is a withdrawal of all U.S. military personnel in Afghanistan, and at the same time was involved in a NEO. A NEO is a non-combatant evacuation operation, not just of U.S. citizens, but also of Afghan citizens, as well as allies and partners and the third country nationals who are trying to leave. The magnitude of this was unprecedented in history. And therefore, the Biden administration, I think, was grappling with a sharply and rapidly deteriorating situation, and they tried to do the best they can.
Now, and the new report acknowledging that the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021 should have been handled differently. I sat down with the president just days after the withdrawal. Now, you don't think this could have been handled, this actually could have been handled better in any way? No mistakes?
No, I don't think it could have been handled in a way that we're going to go back in hindsight and look, but the idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that happened. But the idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that happened.
So for you, that was always priced into the decision?
Yes. Now, exactly what happened, I was not priced in, but I knew that they're going to have an enormous. Look, one of the things we didn't know is what the Taliban would do in terms of trying to keep people from getting out, what they would do.
Let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. And Mary, they have now reversed course on this.
George, the White House now concedes that they should have acted sooner, but this long-awaited report does not explicitly say that mistakes were made. And when I've asked repeatedly, the White House won't say if the president has any regrets now, just that lessons were learned. And they are putting much of the blame for this withdrawal on the Trump administration. This morning, the White House is defending the chaotic end to America's longest war, acknowledging after scenes like these, thousands rushing to flee Kabul, and the attack at the airport that killed 13 U.S. service members, that the U.S. should have started the evacuation sooner. But the White House is also pinning much of the blame for the disastrous withdrawal on the Trump administration, arguing their hands were tied by Trump's deal with the Taliban to withdraw U.S. troops by the spring of 2021.
It is also undeniable that decisions made and the lack of planning done by the previous administration significantly limited options available to him.
Then President Biden called the evacuation an extraordinary success. The White House is still defending it now.
For all this talk of chaos, I just didn't see it. Not from my perch. It was tough in the first few hours. You would expect it to be.
At the time, the administration was stunned that it took just 11 days for the Taliban to regain control of Afghanistan. But the report says the U.S. now thinks it was inevitable, that there was no scenario except a permanent and significantly expanded U.S. military presence that would have changed the trajectory.
What happened, what they've done, is incredible. So they walked in without a bullet being shot, without a bullet being fired. They walked in and they took over Kabul and they took over everything else. And if you look back at a timeline, we held them totally steady. But I wanted to get out, but we had to get out with dignity.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was time to end a 20-year war. Thank you so much. These ISIS terrorists will not win. We will rescue the Americans. We will get our Afghan allies. And our mission will go on. America will not be intimidated.
We had to take our $80 billion worth of equipment. We had to do all of the things that you know we had to do. And then I would have blown up all the air bases, but I would have kept Bagram, because Bagram's located right next to China, right near China and Iran. And it's in Afghanistan. So we had the whole group covered. They spent $10 billion building it, and we handed out the keys. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
No nation has ever done anything like it in all of history. Only the United States had the capacity and the will and the ability to do it, and we did it today. The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats and intelligence professionals. For weeks, they risked their lives to get American citizens, Afghans who helped us, citizens of our allies and partners and others on board planes and out of the country. And they did it facing a crush of enormous crowds seeking to leave the country. And they did it knowing ISIS-K terrorists, sworn enemies of the Taliban, were lurking in the midst of those crowds. And still, the women and men of the United States military, our diplomatic corps, and intelligence professionals did their job and did it well.